Video game preservation is important, and I don't really think that's a controversial statement to say. In fact, I'm pretty sure that all but the most toxic of fans would agree with me. And as somebody with a passion for collecting old video game consoles, and by extension their games, it's really unfortunate to see how many modern-day game companies don't share that same sentiment. And so today I want to go over the good, the bad, and the ugly of modern-day video game preservation. So let's dive in. Now, for me personally, I like to start out with the positives, so we're going to take a look first at the good of modern video game preservation, and it's hard not to mention companies like Microsoft when you talk about good video game preservation. I mean, all you have to do is take a look at something like the Halo series and the Master Chief Collection to see that 343, a Microsoft company, has done their best to preserve the Bungie Halo games and Halo 4. Not so much Halo 5, but you can still play that on the Xbox, so it's not a big loss. But the Master Chief Collection is just an example of them taking older games and porting them to the newer platform in one collection. You can actually take the 360 and original Xbox game discs and put them into the modern Xbox, whether it be the One or the Series consoles, and actually play them on this platform. The only disadvantage to this, though, is that it's not every original Xbox or Xbox 360 game. Some of them just don't have the download available. And that does kind of suck, but we'll talk more about that in the bad of the video game preservation lineup. Other examples of good video game preservation include Sony taking games from the PS4 and moving them up to the PS5 in a PS5 edition, though some caveats in that will put it into the bad. Again, more on that later. And my personal favorite example of good video game preservation actually comes from a very unlikely source, which is Atari. A little while ago now, Atari released the Atari 2600 Plus, and it's basically just a modern Atari 2600. It looks like the old console, but it has an HDMI output, it allows for widescreen support, and you can plug in your original controllers, it comes with new controllers, and it plays, from everything I've seen, all of the old Atari 2600 and 7800 cartridges. Considering the fact that the original Atari 2600 is from the 70s and it's not getting any younger, if you want to keep your old console in good shape but still play the old games, this is a fantastic way of doing it. I love the fact that Atari is basically banking on the fact that nobody really remembers their later consoles like the Jaguar, and everybody remembers them for the Atari 2600, so why not release a device that can play all of the original games, good and bad, E.T., and not have to worry about making a new game console. You're just preserving your old stuff. That's awesome. And I mean, considering it's only $130 for what is essentially a video game collector's dream device, I am so excited to actually buy one. But this isn't a review of that. The point is that this is a really great way of preserving old games and preserving the old hardware, because you can play your old games and not have to wear out your old hardware. It's a win-win. But in general, the examples that I've given here are what I think are good examples of video game preservation attempts, whether it be porting the games over into a collection to continue playing them, or allowing for a download of the game just adapted to run on newer hardware, or in this instance of the Atari 2600 Plus, having a dedicated piece of hardware that just plays all your old games. But now with that out of the way, it's time to talk about the bad of video game preservation. And of course, we have to talk about what I mentioned earlier with Sony and Xbox. So I mentioned that one of Sony's efforts to bring games forward is to make the PS4 games into PS5 games. And that's fine, except for the fact that a lot of times these games require you to repurchase them. Now, I don't know about you all, but there have only been a few games that I've purchased more than once, those being games from the Halo series and Skyrim. But the only reasons I've ever done that are either because I want to get the game for a different platform, like Skyrim on the Switch, which ended up being a bit of a mistake, or because the discs just wear out, like my original copy of Halo 1 that I bought all the way back in 2001. But taking a game from a console that's only one generation old and making it so that you have to get the next step up for the compatible console kind of sucks. I wish you could just take the old discs and put them into the new consoles, like you used to be able to do back in the day with the 360 and the original Xbox, or the PS2 and the OG PS3, or the PS1 and the PS2, which also kills me because Sony used to be really, really good at backwards compatibility when nobody else was. Another example of bad video game preservation comes from something I mentioned earlier, which was the Xbox's capability of playing old 360 and original Xbox games. That is great, but it requires you to fully download the game in an emulated environment. And that's also fine. But if you're going to go to the effort of taking a game and putting it into an emulated environment to play on the console, why not make that emulated environment into an app that allows you to play even the older, more obscure Xbox titles? Like, I don't know of anybody aside from myself who's going to be pulling out IHRA Motorsports Drag Racing 2004, but if I wanted to play it, I got to go and pull out the original Xbox instead of putting it into the Xbox Series X. Whereas if the original Xbox was made into an app that just emulates whatever game you put in, that would solve the problem right away, and obscure games like this could still be played on modern hardware. And really, it's not just the Xbox, both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and S are just powerful x86 computers with custom software for gaming. So I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that you could potentially make emulated software into an app that could play PS1 or PS2 games. And I know the PS3 is a little weird with its cell processor, but we've seen some pretty good emulators on computers that aren't even as powerful as the PS5. So I would hope that you could make an app out of those, but that's wishful thinking. But the last example of bad video game preservation comes from the king of bad video game preservation, which is Nintendo. Now, don't get me wrong, you can play old Nintendo games on the Nintendo Switch through their online service, which means that you have to pay a subscription. Instead of buying the game again, which is what Sony likes you to do, you're locked into paying a subscription service to access these old games. And sometimes the games they put on this platform aren't even what they used to be. Modern Vintage Gamer did a great video talking about how Ocarina of Time on the online service just wasn't what it used to be on the cartridge because the emulation was wrong. All these things I just listed, in my opinion, are not the way you should preserve a game. If somebody owns a game from years back and they want to play it again on a modern piece of hardware, you should be able to do that. And if you don't have it anymore, sure, repurchasing it makes sense. It's just not the best way to go about it, in my opinion, especially considering that in Nintendo's case, it relies on an online service that, if that goes away, means you can no longer play these games. Which leads us perfectly into the ugly of modern video game preservation. And just like before, we get to look at the king of bad video game preservation, which is Nintendo. And in case you don't know, there is absolutely a reason why I held up the 3DS when talking about bad video game preservation in Nintendo, because Nintendo closed the eShop for the 3DS. Now, to be fair, Nintendo's not the only company to shut down an online store for their portable game console. PlayStation did it with the PSP, but the PSP came out in an era where you could buy games digitally, but the most common format was still physical. So if I wanted to go and buy a PSP game, I could still buy one, and it's not the end of the world. It's just a little harder to find them, and eventually you're going to collect all of them if you really put your mind to it. Nintendo, on the other hand, had the 3DS online with an eShop well into the era where games were coming out exclusively digitally. And so when the eShop for the DS shut down, games that were exclusive to that eShop were nowhere else, and you could no longer get them unless you already owned them. And that really sucks. If you want my opinion, all video games are art, and it's art that deserves to be preserved for as long as possible. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Because I remember as a kid, the first time I climbed out of the escape pod onto the Halo ring and watched that ring climb into the sky, loop around, and connect to the other side of the landscape, and hearing the music swell, and just building this experience for me that left a memory in my mind that will last for the rest of my life. And to be able to share that with future generations is something special, because a memory is something that you can relay to somebody else. But to let them experience that is something that allows them to build their own memories. And if companies take away the ability to experience what you experienced and create memories like they created memories for you on the original consoles, well then, beautiful games like that will only be a memory. But either way, that's been it. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Leave a comment down below. What games do you hold fondly in your memory and hope to really see preserved for the future? I'm actually curious to see. If you like this kind of video, definitely leave a like. If you want to see more like it, go ahead and subscribe, because I've got a lot of stuff on the books and I'm really excited to see what is coming in the future. Aside from that, again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.